in reading your book, there's a line that always came back to me, and I think it's very haunting. You were talking about the Law and Justice Party took over in 2015, talked about them going after state media. You talked about them going after the judiciary, and then you talked about them deconstructing the state, just like Donald Trump has attempted to do. And there's a line that I always keep going back to, and it's this. There was very little pretense about any of this. The point of these changes was not to make government run better. The point was to make government more partisan, the courts more pliable, more beholden to the party. Again, I go back to it. There was very little pretense about any of this. And my God, who could not listen to the tapes of Bob Woodward interviewing Donald Trump and not be staggered by that very fact in America, in a crisis that wasn't just about making courts more pliable, but in a crisis that has already killed 200,000 Americans.
Yes, I think one of the difficulties we've all had with trying to understand Trump is that we expect him to keep secrets. We expect him not to tell us that he prefers the company of authoritarians over America's allies. We expect him not to ask the Russians for help, in his election campaign. But because he did all those things openly and publicly, because there's no investigative reporting needed to find out about any of it, we find it confusing. We're taken aback. Really, he's been telling us since 2015 that he despises and dislikes the American political system, that he wants to undermine it, that he wants to change it, that he doesn't respect the institutions of American democracy. And it's really been our own blindness, our own refusal to take that seriously, our own insistence that he's joking, or that it's only a ruse, or that it's only an electoral strategy. I think he's been telling these things all along. We're at a really interesting moment now, though. In this electoral cycle, we've got a couple of months left before the campaign. And we're now in a moment when Trump and the people who work for Trump, like Michael Caputo, but not only, his election staff and everybody else, now need to create a totally false picture of the world. And they need to get people to believe it. So they need to create a world in which America is not suffering from a deadly disease, in which the greatest threat to American peace and stability, and the economy is left-wing anarchists, and not economic crisis or fire or pandemic. He needs to create this false picture of reality, and people around him are going to start doing that. I mean, they may even tell us that's what they're doing, because that's the nature of the beast. But resisting this, understanding that that's what's happening, is going to be very difficult for a lot of people. The narratives are going to be very strong. They're going to be repeated frequently. People of dubious mental health, like Mr. Caputo, are going to begin seeing left-wing anarchists in the street, people trying to kill him. Some Americans are going to prepare for combat. And I think we need to be ready for this, and we need to keep as many of our friends possible focused on reality and not what they're hearing on television.
Well, and Ann, this is, again, what is so instructive about your book, and also Masha's, but you actually explain how this has already happened in Poland, how it's already happened in Hungary. Of course, in Hungary, Orban decides to declare war on the Muslims, the invading Muslims. And you point out, well, there aren't really any invading Muslims, but they certainly make a nice alternative reality. Poland tried to do the same thing. It didn't work there. So then the war was launched against sexual minorities, as your husband said. And that war, of course, even included religious leaders from the Catholic Church joining in, suggesting that gay and lesbian Poles were trying to destroy the country.
Yes, so the need to create a false enemy, or is of course central to these kinds of authoritarian ideologies. But again, it's important. You've underlined an important point, that it's possible to create them and to create fear of them even when they don't exist. or even when there's one or two of them. I mean, there are real examples of, there have been one or two acts of left-wing violence, and there have been some real rioting in America, things that really does scare people. And those incidents are going to be blown up and created and made into a kind of army that's coming to get you and your family in the suburbs. And the lesson of Poland and Hungary, and not only the lesson of Russia, the lesson of Turkey, is that these kinds of narratives, when you begin repeating over and over again, when you begin showing people, clips over and over again, they can genuinely become afraid. The virtual world is as frightening as the real world, and it can be used to create a false or largely fictitious enemy that will make people afraid and will cause them to want to vote for Trump.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.